Hi, this is FUT-1439, SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications, the road ahead. My name is Christian Holding. I'm the product manager for SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications, and I'm going to take you through this presentation today. So what we're going to cover is basically starting with the basics, explaining to you what the product is and what it consists of. Then we're going to move into deployment and operations from a for SAP applications perspective. We briefly cover SAP and workloads in Kubernetes and containers. Then we have a very quick view on the high availability options that we're providing. And last thing, we're going to talk about the road ahead and where we're going to take the product in the next service packs. So diving into the product overview, first of all, SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP application consists of a couple of modules, starting with the SUSE Linux Enterprise Server as the base, and obviously as containers, and we're going to cover this in a little bit, are becoming more important in the SAP space. We also provide the container runtime module here, but again, we cover this later. Part of the SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications is also the high availability extension, as we're talking within the SAP space of mission critical workloads. And high availability is a key feature that a lot of customers require here to basically provide uptime for their SAP environments. We also ship as part of the product a set of SAP-specific features that are only available for within for SAP, which is basically, if we start from the bottom, monitoring capabilities that we cover in a few minutes in greater detail, a set of YAST extensions for SAP that help you to deploy and manage SAP workloads. Then we have SAP resource agents for the high availability setup for HANA, so that basically HANA environments are managed in a high availability state by for SAP. We have a cluster connector. We're not going to cover this here in detail, but that basically allows an SAP administrator to manage the cluster from within their SAP environments and not on the Linux command line. We also provide deployment automation. That is also something we're going to cover in a few minutes. And we have a set of SAP-specific tooling that allows customers to basically tune the server for the SAP workloads based on the SAP nodes. So there's a level of automation, but we also cover that in more detail in a few minutes. And last but not least, every version of the SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications in the 12 and 15 code stream also provides enhanced service pack overlap support, which means we do support every service pack for 4.5 years, in general. Around the keys for SAP offering, we also have a set of additional offerings that are relevant in the SAP space. I just want to briefly mention that, starting on the left-hand side, the SUSE Manager, which allows you to manage patches, the systems itself, and also SUMA is involved in the monitoring capabilities and deployment capabilities that we're bringing to market. We also have SUSE Live Patching, which is available as an option for SAP workloads, which means that a customer can basically, without rebooting, patch the system and maintain the uptime of the environment. And we also provide SUSE Enterprise Storage, which can be connected to the server and help you to address storage needs in the SAP space. When we talk about for SAP, and let me also mention this briefly here, SAP is certifying HANA also on the plain SLES distribution, but as I said before, a set of features and tools are only available as part of SLES for SAP. For example, and that's probably the most critical component, the high availability component for HANA is only supported in SLES for SAP. So let's just get this out of the way. When we talk SLES for SAP, we're really addressing any SAP workloads with this product, starting with the traditional NetWeaver servers, HANA databases, the new versions of S/4HANA, and we're also looking into new SAP product areas like Data Hub or Data Intelligence, as SAP is calling it these days. So there's a rebranding going on. In any of these cases, what we're looking for is a consistency of the products above the different deployment options that we provide. So we're starting in the traditional environment with the bare metal deployment. We obviously support Intel-based CPUs. We also support IBM Power running in LPARs. And for NetWeaver workloads, also IBM System Z, also in LPARs. So there is a variety, and that's obviously in sync with the certification and the support that SAP provides for these workloads. Besides bare metal deployments, we also support virtualized deployments in VMware, KVM, and a few other options. Let me just mention here that we are working right now in updating the KVM-based certifications. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye on the upcoming news, the SUSE blog. And, we should have the current certifications in place for SAP HANA, hopefully relatively soon. NetWeaver, of course, is already certified for KVM. As public clouds become more and more important, there are very strong relationships from a SUSE perspective with the public cloud providers, naming Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Alibaba, and IBM Cloud. So we have very close relationship with each of the major vendors here to provide the product in the public cloud space. And as I mentioned before, containers are a topic that is more and more important to SAP customers. And also in this space, we obviously work very closely with SAP and have options here. We cover that in more detail later. But just to quickly mention that, that's a little bit obviously outside of the SLES for SAP product, but in the SAP space, it's important. So it's the CAS platform, and SAP Gardener and Kubernetes, but again, we talk about this in a few minutes. So the consistency that we're really looking for is basically, again, the tuning of the system for SAP workloads, high availability deployment, so it's supported for bare metal, virtualized, and public clouds. Deployment automation and monitoring are also consistently working on these three platforms. Again, containers are sort of a little different in this context, and we keep you updated on that. So whatever we do here from a SLES for SAP perspective fits into the larger SUSE strategy in terms of simplifying the environments, modernizing the environments, and accelerating the value that you get out of the products. So keep this in mind. I just want to mention it briefly here, also to give you a perspective of how we think about the new features that we're working on and that we're doing for the next service packs and the next versions of SLES for SAP. With that, let's basically jump into the deployment and operation section. So one of the very big news that we're bringing forward with SLES 15 SP2, and that we're also intending to make available for earlier versions over time, is basically reworking the deployment automation of SAP workloads on top of our environment. So you might be familiar that in the past we had dedicated YAST modules, And these YAST modules had a deployment wizard where you could basically do the basic SAP configuration, and the wizard would go ahead and deploy an SAP system. Now with the new world, S/4HANA, SAP HANA is the required database for a lot of the new workloads. It was about time to rework the deployment automation, and what the team has been working on for the last couple of months actually is to move the existing deployment automation to salt-based recipes. From a SUSE perspective, we have standardized on SALT as our automation framework and platform that's also consistent with SUSE Manager, which means that whatever we do here in the deployment automation can be leveraged on a command line interface within YAST or within the SUSE Manager. So we're really looking at giving you choice here and not limiting anything. If you decide to not use SUSE Manager, but you want to go with a bash centered automation, you will be able to do so. And where we started basically is in the HANA area, where we were building multiple deployment recipes. That's how we call them. That allows us to deploy a single node HANA. That's obviously where we started. But at this point, we are in the position that we have a fully automated deployment of a single node and a clustered HANA. So you can really choose which parts you want and which level of automation you would like to leverage for your SAP deployments. So HANA was something that we got implemented very relatively quickly. And what we also have done right now is the deployment automation for NetWeaver. So at this point, we're able to deploy an application servers, establish the mandatory NetWeaver cluster. All of that is fully automated. The next step, and the development team is already looking into this, is to extend the deployment automation and basically combine HANA and NetWeaver into an S4 deployment. So what we're really looking at is to be able to fully automate an S4 deployment based on the SALT automation. So this whole project basically started out of a collaboration with Microsoft Azure, which I think is an obvious starting point, as cloud is introducing really a lot of change in how people consume software. Clouds, the CSPs provide a lot of automation portals, and as a customer, you can basically just go to an Azure or an Amazon portal and say, I want these machines. They are automatically deployed for you and ready for you to be used. And why not going a step forward and basically automating the SAP deployment here? So that is work that we're actually doing. You see the two links to the package hub repository, where we have a packaged version of the deployment automation, and also the GitHub repositories, where you see the full deployment automation, and it's tailored for Azure, AWS, and GCP at this point, as well as for on-premise deployments. As said before, this is going to make its way into /15 SP2. So we're really going to support it as part of the product. And I just had a meeting earlier today where we were discussing how we can take this forward and even add more automation and bring more benefits to you as a client here to get consistent automation and be able to move administrators away from the more boring tasks of setting up environments to really more interesting things like configuring the environment and do non-repeating tasks. So that's that part. As part of the deployment automation, we also looked into the topic of monitoring. And when you look into Kubernetes at this point and container-based workloads, there are two open source projects that are very prominent and that are used in this context, which is Prometheus as a data collector and exporter, and Grafana as a rendering dashboard. And as we had some skills in the team, we were thinking, like, can we apply this to SAP workloads as well, and in conjunction with the deployment project. So these two projects are actually merged together, and you will find also the monitoring capabilities as part of the deployment automation project. You can select to just set up the monitoring, deploy Prometheus, and that puts you into a situation that Prometheus on a HANA node will be able to collect metrics and export that via standard interfaces to the outside world. So also here, we're not trying to lock anybody into a specific solution. As for example, Prometheus could also export to an Agios environment. But from a SUSE perspective, we also want to provide a full stack, and with the Prometheus exporters that are becoming part of SLES for SAP, you will be able to export data to a monitoring solution and either use the upstream solution or leverage SUSE Manager here to aggregate the collected data and render it in the Grafana dashboard. By the way, this is also fully open source, and we've contributed the Grafana dashboards to the Grafana project as well. So where we are at this point, I was already referencing the HANA exporters that are part of SLES for SAP in SP2 and 15 SP2. We have exporters for the HANA metrics itself. We have exporters for the cluster software, so we're also exporting the health of the pacemaker cluster to be consumed by the monitoring tools, and obviously we also export KPIs from the underlying operating system. All that is part of the package, and you can leverage that. And it's not a wrong guess if you're thinking like, okay, where are these guys taking it next? Because NetWeaver is something that is also obviously very interesting here, having a holistic solution, and that's something that we look into right now to bring that part also forward and include this into the solution. So as slides are, or text is a little boring, this is a pretty recent screenshot of where we are, giving you an idea of how a Grafana dashboard could look like. So you see the respective clusters on the top left. You see where the systems are in its functional state, what the network traffic, the CPU load is, memory load is obviously also very interesting from a HANA perspective. So you get all of this here, and when you look into the Grafana environment, into the project, there is also alerting capabilities. So there is, I think, quite some room for us to add additional value also in this project. Now, moving on from here, we've recently shipped a new version of SubTune. Remember, SubTune is part of SLES for SAP, and it's automatically deploying SAP's recommendations of operating system tuning parameters with your installation. So version 2 is out since a couple of months. We've updated, obviously, the SAP nodes that are managed and deployed by the system, but there's also quite a bit of stuff that happened in the background. So we added verification and transparency. So if for whatever reason you decide don't want SubTune to actually apply the tuning parameters, but I want to use SubTune to check if my system is compliant with the SAP nodes, you're able to do this now and just use SubTune in a way to verify, as you see it on the bottom screenshot, verify your system for a specific SAP node. We've also reworked the configuration of the environment. So if you have experienced that certain tuning parameters work better in one way or the other, then you can override the configuration, and that's all in a dedicated environment. And obviously, we're also having discussions with the hardware partners to see if they want to embrace SubTune for their specific configurations. So there's also a way to create custom nodes, either for you as a customer or as a partner, and then distribute them to the system and have SubTune picking them up. Where we go from here, where we go next, is basically we want to improve logging. That's something that we've heard a couple of times from customers, that they want more logging of changes that are made to the system. So we're looking into that. Machine readable interface is something that came up quite a few times, because if you think of managing compliance within a tool like SUSE Manager, that's a no-brainer to use SubTune to track the compliance, check for it, and then upload it to SUSE Manager. So that's also something we're looking into. And one of the next thing that we also want to do is make it cloud and HA aware, because there might be different tuning suggestions from SAP for the respective setups. And that's something that you will see happening in the next couple of months. There's also, and that's on most of the charts, a reference to the respective SAP nodes and blog posts on this. So feel free to get more information on these sources. We recognize that a lot of customers are still on the 12 code stream, which is okay. We just shipped 12 SP5, and that has a fairly long support cycle. Nevertheless, there is a question of how can I upgrade from 12 to 15? You see this mentioned on the chart here. So within a given code stream, you're able to do an online upgrade. If you move from 12 to the 15 code stream, you would basically do kind of an offline update, which means you're basically using an ISO image and not pull the repositories online, reboot the system, and then you're at 15 GA and SP1, with SP2 coming pretty soon. Quick notes here. This is true. So we also support the migration from a plain slash to a slash for SAP applications environment. So there is a tech note that you can search for that explains the process, how that's being done. I mentioned that SP5 on the 12 code stream is the last service pack. So that's important to understand. And we do a lot of magic, but we're not doing enough magic to support migration between architectures. So when you are on a power system and you have a big endian system and you move to little endian, that's something where you will need to reinstall, and obviously, but I also think that's pretty clear if you move from Intel to Power or Power to Intel or to the cloud. So that upgrade path will also not work that easily, and that requires a little more testing on your end. Just to briefly touch on support deadlines. As I said, SP5 for 12 is the last service pack that sees a fairly long support cycle until 2027 for plain slash. And the dates are pretty much, as you can see, the same here between slash and slash for SAP. But as I mentioned originally, there is a difference because on the slash side, if you want to go and to get support outside of the 1 year plus 6 month overlap support, you will need to purchase an LTSS subscription. And for slash for SAP, we provide 4.5 years support out of the box with the base subscription. So that gives you the 4.5 years. And if you look at 12 SP5, You get the regular support for SAP until 2024, and also there, as this is the last service pack, you would be able to purchase LTSS. Otherwise, it's included in SLES for SAP. And obviously, as this is important for SAP customers, we have SLES 12 SP5 and SLES 15 SP1 all certified by SAP for NetWeaver and HANA workloads. Expecting to see 15 SP2 mid this year. We're also preparing right now in Germany, in Waldorf, with our SAP friends to also get that certification done very quickly and have that in place around the release date, maybe a little later. A few words on persistent memory. So that is an interesting development, especially in the HANA space. As HANA being a in-memory database, that means on a restart of the server and a reboot, you will need to load the database from disk. And if you think about very small HANA databases, that's potentially not a big problem if you think about a terabyte or two. But if you go into 8, 9, 12 terabyte HANA systems, that will just take a while to read that from disk and process the data. So Intel has brought a technology called Optane DC, persistent memory, to the market about 1.5 years ago, which allows HANA to store the column store of the database. So it's not the whole database, but the major part of the database in a persistent memory, which is basically acting as a DIMM, as a DRAM. And during the reboot, the data would reside on the memory, which means on starting of the HANA database, you do a quick consistency check, but the system is back in operation much faster, which means if you think about a HANA cluster, that eliminates quite a bit of risk for data loss, as obviously if one of the HANA nodes is restarting and you have a problem on the other one, your database is down. And the faster you can restart, the better it is. As a nice side effect, you also get a higher density and larger DRAM modules. And we support this from a SUSE perspective since 12 SP4 and SLES 15 GA. Our friends from the IBM side, IBM Power side, also have worked on an offering here, and they introduced virtual PMEM, virtual persistent memory, in a firmware update at the end of last year. That is also supported from a SUSE side with SLES 15 SP1, and that is basically a similar functionality. As I mentioned earlier, HANA is running in an LPAR, so in a virtual machine, and during the reboot, IBM keeps the HANA data persistent and maps the memory back into the LPAR. So also here you see the reference to the respective SAP nodes, and also here, just as a side note, had an interesting discussion this morning with Intel, what they are working on. So there will be a new version of Optane DC coming soon, and some significant updates in the pipeline. So it's going to be interesting, and I expect more happening in this space pretty soon. I touched briefly on virtualization and that we support this from a SLES and SLES for SAP perspective. Just for the reference of people, here's a matrix of the various virtualization technologies, the traditional VMs, hardware partitioning, hyperconverged, and infrastructure as a service. In terms of what is supported, what the recommendations are. So here's a collection again of the SAP nodes for HANA, for non-HANA databases, for NetWeaver, and so on. So when you move in this direction and you are not aware of these SAP nodes, take a look at them and see what the recommendations for the deployments you're looking for are. Just one brief word on something that we don't highlight a lot, but I briefly want to cover it here. Besides the main S4 systems, SAP also provides a system for more SMB-focused customers, or a solution called SAP Business One. From a SUSE perspective, we have a very strong and tight relationship with SAP, as we're the only vendor that provides a installation image for Business One. That's been driven through the hardware vendors and local system integrators, so we have very tight relationships with them and test the image. But basically, this image is used to set up the system automatically, so somewhat in the direction of the deployment automation, just much more focused, a lot tighter set of configurations here. But in the end, similar idea. I can take the image and just deploy a Business One system, customize it, and deliver it to the client. So the reason I bring this up is getting awareness. On the other hand side, we are in the midst of reworking this, porting it to /15 SP1. My colleagues from the Linux Lab have actually published a survey. If you would like to participate, if you're a system integrator, we really value your feedback on this. Please reach out to us and we get you a copy of the survey to collect additional feedback. Okay, so far so good. Let's quickly touch on Gartner, Kubernetes, SAP Data Hub, and SAP HANA. So, as I said before a couple of times, SAP is looking into container technologies, and there are quite some interesting projects going on. One of the products from SAP that require a container runtime environment is SAP Data Hub, which is going to transform now into SAP Data Intelligence, so there is a rebranding. It's quite interesting from a SUSE perspective. I'm not going to give you a pitch of what a Data Hub is, but a Data Hub basically embraces SUSE technology, so the containers it's based on are SUSE containers, and for public cloud deployments, SAP has basically started a open source project called SAP Gartner that is used to manage the different instances. So what SAP is doing here is basically, if you go and purchase a Data Hub as a service, Gartner is used to set up a dedicated environment for you that holds its own Kubernetes environment and that the containers are deployed into. And that is Gartner. It's, again, fully open source. SAP isn't charging for it. If you're interested in Gartner, take a look at it. We also contribute from a development side into Gartner. We see where that leads. There are some interesting discussions going on. But really, for the time being, we do have a set of offerings as a Data Hub is based on SUSE containers. I think it's a fairly natural step to also look at the SUSE Container as a Service platform as the underlying runtime to operate Data Hub deployments. There are various reference architectures done with the hardware partners on how to deploy things. So if you're not aware of it, take a look. And again, there will be more things coming. I think obvious question is, what about HANA? So I'm not going to really comment on it, but for definitely on-premise deployments, that's tricky and not really pushed by SAP at this point. It might technically work. I would question if that is, at this point, a supported configuration. To just quickly touch on that. Okay, so moving on to high availability. From a SUSE perspective, I think we are the leader in high availability for a very long time, especially in the HANA environment. and we have and continue to publish a lot of best practices, guides, descriptions of how to set up environments. And as I mentioned before on the deployment automation, what was actually the foundation for the clustered setup here is our best practice that we just turned in automation and configuration code. So that's one thing. The other thing is this graphic doesn't represent all the supported configurations, obviously. What it does represent is a number of best practices and documentations that we've published and that you find on our SUSE website. So GCP is obviously also supported, but they are publishing their best practices on their own. That's why, for example, Google isn't featured on this chart. Okay, so we've briefly touched on HANA. We're coming back to HANA in a minute, but if we're looking above and beyond the HANA database clusters, then an SAP S/4HANA system or a general SAP Business Suite system consists of also the NetWeaver service. And for a NetWeaver service, we obviously also support the HA configurations, the environments. So what we see in an S/4HANA environment is we have the mandatory cluster with the ASCS, the central instance, and the ERS, the replication server. That should be clustered, and I think it even needs to be clustered by SAP's recommendation, as this is the very critical set of components for the environment to maintain consistency. You could also cluster additional app servers. That's optional. It doesn't need to be done. And obviously at the bottom right, you want to cluster definitely, no matter what database you're using, the database servers. HANA is what I think most customers are moving to. We have best practices for clustering Sybase here and integrating them. So please check out our websites, check out the best practices towards zero downtime to get a more complete picture and see what we have available for your specific configurations. Now, going back to HANA, to the HANA environment, there are four main setups that we support for the HANA system replication HA configuration. The first one is on the top left, the performance optimized environment. That's I think where most customers are. I do have two HANA nodes. One is active, one is passive, or I'm having the second one as a read-only environment. Also that configuration is possible, and we use Pacemaker and a few other open source tools to move the primary over in case of a failure, and also handle the system replication. So that's the standard setup. We also support, if we move to the right, the cost optimized setup, where you see there is one difference, that on the secondary node, a HANA QA instance is basically running. So if you're saying I'm satisfied with the performance of my primary HANA environment and I want to use the second one to do some QA work, then you're able to do this. That saves hardware costs. On the other hand side, that also means if you have a failure and you need to move primary from the left to the right, then that means you first need to shut down the QA system, restart the secondary node. So the takeover takes a little longer. There's a little balance that you need to decide upon. Then at the bottom left, multi-target replication. That is something that we've documented recently, where we have a cluster that is spanning two nodes that's handled, and you can have a third or a fourth node that are not managed in the cluster and are part of the takeover here, but that see a replication from the cluster. and can be used as another fallback system, or in a geo-clustering location. We've seen this with clients in the United States, where they basically have two data centers. Within one data center, they run a HANA cluster, and they do multi-target replication over to a second data center. So all these scenarios are supported now, and again, you find the documentation on the website. And then there's obviously the performance optimized environment for scale out. All the others were scale up. But if I'm deciding to take smaller machines for my HANA environment and I scale out the database, then you can also go ahead and say, I have one HANA instance consisting of multiple servers in data center A. I have another one in data center B, and the SUSE clustering solution handles the failover from one data center to another. There is some sort of failover inside the HANA scalar cluster itself, so it's a bigger urgency that the clustering software covers here. So there are a couple of additional HA configurations that we do. We covered already the HANA multi-target replication on the right-hand side. As I said before, there is only two nodes are managed within a cluster at this point. The third node is outside of the cluster and needs some manual intervention, but the configuration is supported, and we see where we take it from here. This is again active and documented. Another request that we heard multiple times is basically multi-SID support, which is especially interesting within a cloud-based environment where customers are saying, I'm running a multi-SAP system environment, and the ASCS and the ERS don't have that high requirements. Do I have a chance to basically move multiple SAP SIDs, multiple systems, and consolidate ERS and ASCS on just two machines within a cluster and break the rest out in application servers? So that's also something that we've documented and that you find on the best practices and the SUSE blog, how to configure this. That gives cloud-based customers more flexibility and a better TCO if you have more than one SAP system that you operate in one of the environments within the cloud. Okay, just briefly touching on one additional thing, which is the tool set. That's actually very handy and on the back end. So we've updated the HANA SR tool set to basically provide you the ability to replay a HANA log and do a postmortem analysis. And the new thing that we've added is basically the visualization of it. So instead of going through gigabytes of HANA log and finding the right spot where you see the failure, we can filter it down, as you see it on the command line, down to a host or a cluster, and then visualize it. So you see on the screenshot of the bottom basically the direction of replication. You will also see the state of the node, as you see it in the log excerpt above that. And the format we are using is very much the same format that you would see on the HANA console as well, so that we stay consistent here. Probably worth taking a look, and I think pretty useful. There are two other tools that are critical that we update and that will be part of 15 SP2. First one is cluster tools, which is a set of scripts that help you to troubleshoot and manage the pacemaker cluster. So there's a major update that goes into 15 SP2 of the cluster tools, and that's basically getting the latest upstream version and features included into the product. And on the other hand side, the SUSE support config is basically when you're a customer and you had a support case, one of the key things that our support colleagues ask you for. And there has been an extension for SAP out for a while that is also becoming part of the product now, so that you have very easy access. You can just pull it down from the repository and deploy it on your environment. So these two things are happening on the back end, and hopefully they are useful for administrators here. Okay, having said all of that, let's just wrap this up. So from a roadmap and directional perspective, what we're looking to do moving forward here is basically simplify the environment, continue to simplify the environment. So high availability will see an additional set of features. There are a set of things SAP is working on. HANA SP5 is coming out. So there will be new things coming that are moving into the product or that are moving into best practices. Then we're gonna continue to innovate on the deployment automation for HANA and NetWeaver with S4 coming, but there are a couple of interesting ideas, including user interfaces to really make it simple to deploy SAP environments and have that automated consistently. And the monitoring, as I briefly mentioned, there are also some interesting ideas that we're looking into, so we're going to continue innovate on that as well. Modernize, as I mentioned, there are new versions of persistent memory on the horizon, potentially other new hardwares like new CPU generations. We're going to look into that. And as briefly mentioned, SAP is looking into container-based workloads, so do we. And there will be more things come into this area. And then the whole accelerate aspect of improving SubTune. SubConf is the tool that's part of SLES. So there are a couple of things unifying these kind of things. Cluster tools will also see more updates. There is an idea of doing some in-flight checks and pre-flight checks. So a couple of ideas that we're looking into that will make it into the product. And in terms of 15 SP2, I think I've covered most of the things. The key new features in SLES for SAP are deployment automation and monitoring, updated tooling, important for administrators. There is something that we are working on right now that I didn't cover in the interest of time, which is the workload memory protection. Some tuning of the environment to basically prevent SAP workloads from being swapped. Obviously very interesting for in-memory databases. That's sort of contradicting the whole idea if you're starting to swap uncontrolled HANA pages to disk. I mean, there is are features from SAP to do that consciously, but you don't want this to happen unconsciously. So there will be an update. And obviously, as the plain SLES features, moving to a later version of the kernel with 5.3. And obviously, general updates are going to flow into SP2 that are coming from the underlying SLES environment. So with that, I just want to point you to a set of additional information that we provide from the local team here at SAP, working very closely with Waldorf, in Waldorf. So also a reference of the CAS platform, a reference to the training. And we all try to blog on a frequent basis. So the Towards Zero Downtime tag is the HA tag. You'll also find a recent blog post on deployment automation and monitoring. So we keep news coming on the blog. If you haven't subscribed, please feel free to do so. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for attending and watching, and please feel free to reach out to us with questions and additional feedback. Thank you. Have a good day.